Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Finance Subcommittee of the Post Commission. We should be brief today. As a matter of fact, I think I'll open and just been talking with our executive director here, and a suggestion, and we can talk about it in the next few weeks, but we might want to, I would think maybe move this meeting back, or at least consider moving this meeting back, maybe just adjacent to the regular commission meeting. We could start at 12:30, 12:45, something like that, rather than drag a lot of people here at 9 o'clock in the morning prior to the advisory committee. So we can maybe get some feedback on that internally in the next couple of months, because especially this meeting, there really isn't a lot of fiscal information since the budget is just being formed. So there's not a lot to talk about. So something to consider, Mr. Executive Director. All right, so let's call to order, and Madam Secretary, if you'd call the roll.
Brazil.
Here.
Bowie. Doyle. Long.
Here.
Marsh. Ramirez. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the time on the agenda for public comment. This is time set aside for members of the public to comment on either items on the agenda or issues not on the agenda but pertaining to post-commission business. Members of the public who wish to speak are asked to limit their remarks to no more than 5 minutes each. I don't believe there's anybody here from the public. The first item, approval of the summary minutes from the previous committee meeting. Unless there's objection, without objection, we can just substitute the previous roll call. Seeing no objection, that's done. Number two, what passes for controversy today perhaps is a quick report on the Advanced Distance Learning Program. This is just for information. No vote is required. This will also be heard, as I recall, on the regular commission agenda today. So we will do this relatively short. Essentially what has happened is that Post has identified about $3.2 million that would be unused by the end of the current fiscal year. This money comes from $10 million that you may recall is reappropriated from the 2018 Budget Act to create a long-distance learning program, $5 million, $3 million for learning management, and $2 million for some distance learning course upgrades. Per your agenda, about $3.2 million has not been expended, and in consultation with the Department of Finance, that money can be redirected to, and the proposal is to redirect the money to the learning management system. I just have a couple quick questions. Maybe Roseanne, I think you're going to address this. A couple quick questions would be, in your remarks, would be, of the three pots, how did they come in under budget? Essentially, you know, and then why are you going to put the 3.2 million all towards the learning pot? Also, just one small question, since you provided me some additional information in the week ahead. The numbers you gave me were like 2.8 million that was left over, but yet you're redirecting 3.2. So there's a little 400,000 there. I'm sure it's just I don't know what it is attributed to, but if you could just address that. No vote is necessary here, but just to kind of sum up why there's money left over and why you're redirecting it as you are.
Yes, thank you. Welcome. Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Roseanne Ritchell. I'm the Bureau Chief for the Learning Technology Resources Bureau. I also have with me Drew Wyant, who is the Bureau Chief for Management Consulting and Bureau. And what he is going to speak to is the long distance grant program. And I'm going to speak towards the course conversions and the learning management system. So as you're aware, we were provided $10 million from the 2018 Budget Act. And this money came about and came back to us in March of 2020 when COVID started to come into play and everybody was forced to start training online because they couldn't train in person. So we were given, this was governor directed money. We were giving the $10 million back and provided a very short time frame to turn around objectives as to how we were going to utilize this money. And we broke it into three pots like you spoke to. The first pot was the distance learning grant program, which we allocated $5 million to. The second one was, sorry, I got to take this down for a minute. The second one was the learning management system modernization. And then the third one was the distance learning course conversion upgrades. and we allocated 2 million to that, totaling $10 million. So over the last 18 months, all of the estimates in these programs, I can take it down? Thanks.
You can take it off while you speak.
Okay, great. Thanks. Got to be able to breathe. All of the monies were estimates at the time based on, I'll speak to the learning management system and also the distance course conversions. For the course conversions, each course costs anywhere from $200,000 to $250,000 to build out a new course. We identified 3 courses, or we identified, I think it was 5 courses that came out to close to 1.8 million. But after we went out to bid, quite a few of those courses came back under bid by vendors. So when we estimate from building a course from the ground up, but these are course conversions. So when we go out to bid, depending upon how the vendor responds, then we go from there. And so like one of the ones you spoke to, or you're asked about, was environmental crimes courses. That course is actually 3 courses in one. There's environmental crimes and then 2 officer safety courses. So that would be approximately $750,000 if the vendor would have come back at full price of $200,000 to $250,000. They did not. They actually came back at $450,000, thus giving us actually they came back about $300,000, and we had $450,000 remaining. So a lot of these estimates we push out for what it would cost to either develop a full course or projections and forecasting what we think things would cost, whether it's the learning management modernization or the course conversion. And then once they go out to bid, we get actual costs. So with the learning management system, that's a whole different ballgame, because we have 2 different things going on there. We are in the process of, Department of General Services said that our current contract, we had to review going through a extended process with the California Department of Technology to determine the current vendor, if we are getting the appropriate efficiencies utilizing that vendor. So we're in what we call the PAL process. And the PAL process is a project approval lifecycle process, and it's a 4-stage process, and it's an arduous process. At the same time, we were trying to identify our learning management system and upgrades to enhance that, to include online distance learning. We were guessing at the time, based on some of the research and reaching out to different learning management systems like Blackboard, Canvas, and other end users, to try to estimate what would be the best cost and the best product for post. So as we were going through the PAL process, we don't have the actual numbers. We were estimating based on our research. And in doing so, we estimated it to be about $3 million. And so the first amount of money for the instructor-led online course costs us about $1.6 million. Knowing that we would have to spend more money to modernize the learning management system to accommodate that learning, we set aside the leftover $1.3 million so that we can enhance the system. And then if we ended up through the PAL process, if they ended up telling us we needed to go to a new vendor, then we knew we were going to need a couple of $1 million just to transfer over to the new vendor, remain with the current vendor, and then do that transition. So what we did is we put the 1.3 million aside, and then just through the process of the legacy course conversion, having money left over, and then through the distance learning grant program, having money left over, we are taking all of those monies and putting them into one pot so that we can continue forward with the learning management system upgrade. That's inevitable. We have to do that. The PAL process tells us we have to do that. Department of General Services and California Department of Technology tell us we have to do that. So that's kind of, there's a whole bunch of things going on with the money, how we got it, how we're going to spend it. But we got Department of Finance approval to move the money from the other money in the pots, whether it's the grant program or the course conversion program, to move it over to the learning management system program to upgrade that. So Drew could speak to how he came about with the leftover money in the distance learning grant program.
Yeah, so the distance learning grant program, we were allocated $5 million for that particular program. We actually had 21 grantees apply. We allocated 4.2 and some change for all those particular grantees, and which left us about 717,000 and some change left over. We had three grantees drop out based on the pandemic and not being able to fulfill their obligations of the grant. Plus, we had another grantee basically finish the grant but had money left overs. Those 4 grantees, their total actually was 363 and some change. So the 2 combined, the money left over there was $1,079,634, and that's kind of where we came up with that number.
I don't think there's anything particularly askance or anything. We just wanted a quick explanation as to why there's money left over and why you're redirecting it. Manny, you'd mentioned there's a slight discrepancy between the numbers you guys gave me last week and the 3.2. Is that just an accounting thing somewhere? Do you know?
I'm going to defer to
Roseanne?
So right now, so we were looking at it this morning, and with the distance learning grant program, we came up with $1,079,634. We have about 1.386 left in the LMS modernization and 701,000 left over in the 2 million. That total comes up to a 3,167,801. And when we put in our agenda item, we estimated it to be about 3.2 million.
Okay, that makes total sense, Roseanne. I was just referring to the numbers you guys gave me earlier in the week, which is a little bit shy, but that's fine. Unless there's any questions on this item, we can move forward. We'll go through it again, I guess, in full committee, but I don't see any concerns there at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The next 4 items are all summary budget reports. John or Scott will present. You can walk us through these, just a kind of a status update, a snapshot in time, if you would, of where we are. Everything looks, from what I can tell, to be on pace. Scott?
Good morning, Commissioner and members of the committee. So we've jumped right into the favorite slide for the Finance Subcommittee meeting, which is depicts the funds and their denigration. I'm sorry, this is out of order from my order, so I'm gonna have to jump into this. So state penalty fund. All right, now we're back. Actually, all right. So this slide, item 3 on the agenda is depicts the current fiscal year, the far right upper budget, which is $83.056 million, and then immediate to the left of that is the FY 2021 budget of $92,234, and then just to the left of that is also the FY 19-20 budget as a comparison to the last year and then the current year. You'll see that the 92,234 is significantly higher than from the 2021 than our current budget. But as Roseanne and Drew just spoke of, that includes the $10 million that was reallocated via BCP for last year for their purposes. So if you subtract that $10 million from the 92,234, you get down just below what our current fiscal year budget is of that 83,056. Now, in the just below that, we also had the last year for COVID purposes, each state agency had to reduce their state operations budget by approximately 5%, and the Department of Finance told us we had to do so by reducing both out of our state penalty fund and our general fund a total of $1.432 million, which brings our actual budget, a usable budget, down to 81,624, and that's kind of our starter for this current fiscal year. Questions about that? All right, now we'll roll into
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Just, and it's more the Department of Finance, the policy on, why was the 5% reduction?
I'm sorry.
The 5% reduction, I think you talked about, that was mandated by finance because of COVID. What really was that? I was just confused because we had the governor saying there's a huge multi-billion-dollar surplus, but yet they told us to reduce our budget. So
Yeah, so each state agency was required via budget letter 20-37 to reduce and their state operations portions of their budget. And Department of Finance then, after discussions with us, and I'm sure every other agency, advised exactly what that number would be. And for us, it was at $1.432 million. I can't speak to the surplus that the state has, but each agency was required to come up with this approximate 5%, and we did so.
Commissioner Brazil, if I can add to that also, if I recall from that time period, that was at the very, very beginning of the year when COVID was still hot and heavy, so to speak, and we were getting into all kinds of other potential COVID issues, and the state was unaware or the estimates were coming in lower than anticipated for revenue for the state. And then they just pushed this through and kept it. So I think it applied to every state agency, and invariably the money had to come from certain pockets of money. And for us, a lot of it came from our administration. So we've had some reductions in our staffing, our travel, all of those things. The local assistance and some of the other pots of money have been untouched, but it was a standard across the board cut for all agencies.
okay. Do we have any indication whether it's going to be returned? In other words, is it a one-time 5% for the one fiscal year, or is
No,
it ongoing?
The budget letter spoke to initial for this fiscal year and ongoing.
Thank you.
And this was, as Director Alvarez mentioned, this started approximately a year ago. We were given some timelines that we had to come up with a final product by, I believe it was February 1st of this past year. So it's been an ongoing process. And then when the new budget was accepted and put into law in July, then that's where it rolled out. But what's interesting is that currently our reduction of 1.432 isn't actually incorporated into the budget galley. So it still shows that higher number of $83 million.
And if I can add also to what Scott said, and Scott, you can get more specific since you know the specifics. We also had to document and negotiate what it was we were going to cut and where we were going to cut and track that. And that's something that Scott and his team and Maria put together, and we're sticking to. I mean, some of it has been challenging. For instance, we've had to rely a lot of times on retired annuitants, and we said, hey, we're going to cut that down by 50%. So we've let a lot of them go. So it's there, and it's been there for everybody, unfortunately.
Any additional questions on this slide? All right, let's go into the state penalty fund. And again, this is just showing over time the reduction in the state penalty fund, which is why from 4 fiscal years ago, we started receiving money out of the general fund to augment. But in the last 12 years, it's essentially dropped by almost 2/3 of its value. All right, next slide, unless there's questions on that one. All right, so jumping back to last fiscal year, with our 92,234 budget, our available balance, and this is truly due to COVID, is we have just over $41 million still available for encumbrance or expenditure. We'll see later in our slide deck that there are some contracts for training that are still have been extended into this current fiscal year and beyond, of which there's an available balance for those contracts of just a little bit over $7 million. So I anticipate once the contracts go for their full life, which is either later on this year or early next calendar year, that we should our balances for 2021 will be reduced accordingly, but no more than approximately $7 million in addition to this. I also point to, Each fiscal year, we get the Reimbursement Authority, that 1.959 million, which is built into our budget. That's actually not cash that we can spend. We actually have to go and receive that money from, we have contracts with CDCR and CHP, as well as we receive money back from audits that the State Controller's Office completes on our behalf for training reimbursement requests. So while it looks like it's in our budget, we actually have to go bill and receive the money in order to receive that for future use or for other use. And for 2021, our billing and our reimbursable amount is $129,000. That's what we've received thus far. And again, this is just authority to be reimbursed. And so it's not truly part of our budget until we actually go get it and receive it for use. Questions about that? All right, jumping to the next slide it's a further breakdown of the state penalty fund and what our expenditures have been pursuant to the SPF. Not a lot to say for this. Again, FY 2021, but for those 13 contracts that are extended that we'll talk about later, there's not going to be too much except for local assistance that's been impacted by this. So these numbers are fairly locked in for the year, again, except for the local assistance piece. And the same thing with the next slide, which is a breakdown of the general fund as well. Go ahead, John. You're already there. Questions about either the SPF or the general fund? All right. Let's go on to the FY 21-22. So that's current year. And the same thing with the Reimbursement Authority. Thus far this year, we've been reimbursed just a little over $7,000. So that's we anticipate more by the end of the fiscal year, but it's all dependent upon the other agencies, as I mentioned, receiving their training, and then contractually us receiving money back for them for the administrative side, as well as some state controller audits of the agencies receiving training reimbursement requests that we do annually. Let's jump into, all right, same thing for the state penalty fund. And I know these are relatively boring slides, and they will change when we hit our March commission meeting for sure. And then the last one before the end of the fiscal year. But we are seeing an uptick for sure in training, in travel for our staff, except for that's limited by the 5% mandatory reduction that we incorporated in. But we should be spending down the rest of our budget. But I think the important part is that we're not over budget in these categories. Questions about that? All right, so jumping into the training reimbursement request. So just to show the current fiscal year at the very bottom, and then last fiscal year, obviously that's was impacted by COVID for agencies who were not sending their staff to training, and therefore there was not much to reimburse. And then the prior fiscal year, 1920, at the very top. We've had some discussions internally recently on how to depict this slide in a more usable fashion, and or put some context to the slide. It's hard to say, okay, we've got the 47,000 reimbursements requests that we processed, and the just a little over $10 million for this current fiscal year, but relative to what, I guess, is the question. And so we're going to work between now and the next commission meeting in March to come up with a better way to project this and so to give you context. But it is a difficult thing to say what is the total amount or total number of potential TRRs being reimbursed. Some agencies don't get reimbursement by statute, any state agency except for the UC and CSU police departments do not receive reimbursement. Also, we train other non-post folks to include some federal agencies as well that come to post training. So while there's some raw numbers we could throw out there, they don't really mean a lot relative to this. So we're going to try and again dive in and give you guys better context to what this truly means and our ability to reimburse. Questions about that?
Scott, may I, if I may, add
Absolutely.
some context to it? So I believe we're receiving in local assistance approximately $34 million a year for local assistance for training reimbursement. To give you an idea of where we were prior to getting the budget bump, was right around 14 million. So there's a significant amount of funding in there, and you can see we're not using it all. I was down in Southern California like 6 months ago, and one of the chiefs asked, hey, when are you guys going to be able to get back up and running and provide training and training money? And it was clear the message had not gotten out there. There is a ton of training opportunities, both where we deliver it as well as for reimbursement. And we're trying very, very much to let agencies know there is money out there, please use it. But you could see we're very, very under every year. And, you know, part of it's obviously for COVID, but that funding is available should they want it. Thanks, Scott.
All right, with no further questions, we'll jump into the next slide, which is the contracts approved by commission. This slide is for 2021, and we throw that up there just to give you a visual of from last fiscal year. Commission approved is what you all agreed to, and just for reference, any contract, regardless of what it's for, over $175,000 must come to commission for approval. Similarly, and that'll come into play here in just the next tab will be any amendment over $25,000 must also come to commission for approval. And yes,
I don't know if you're moving on, but
nope, not moving on.
just a couple of questions on this slide where I think you had 8 contracts or something that were extended. Particularly if you look at this, you've got, you know, ICI, there was 5 million approved, but there's a $3.4 million balance. IDI and AICC, again, there were sizable balances, all of which should be, most of which have already, the contract periods have already expired. As I understand it, you can continue to invoice, I guess, until through the budget year, but the work has to be finished by the end of the contract. So don't we have a sense, say with the ICI in particular, most of which ended on September 30th, how much money there'll be left over? Because we must have some sense that the work is finished. It had to finish by the end of the extended contract. So do we have millions of dollars in short left over?
Essentially, yes, left over. We will, it's each program manager in each bureau that's responsible and for ICI specifically, training program services as the program manages the ICI portion of our contracts. And yes, and for clarity, there was 13 total contracts that were extended for time rather than 8. And yes, there are, let me back up to your original. Yeah, the contracted amount, the approved amount by commission, and then the actual executed or contracted amount. And much like Roseanne had spoke of previously, the estimates are, the high estimates are what we asked the commission to approve, and then the actual executed amounts are what the vendor or the contractor actually is saying that they can do for that period of time. So that's why it's generally at or lower than the commission approved amount. And then we extended, or the program managers extended those for 13 for time to give the vendors the opportunity to continue to put on that same amount of training over a broader time span into the next fiscal year. But to your point of, we're going to have money left over, we probably will. And that money will, once all the invoices are in, and also you're correct in that we can continue to pay off these contracts as long as there's a purchase order on the books essentially for that contract, as long as that training or the work occurred prior to the end of the last date for which the contract was extended, whether it was a regular contract to the end of a fiscal year or these 13 that were extended for time.
And then as we go to the next slide, which will be for 21, 22, to those same programs, then what of the overage? What are we allowed to do and what do you do? Let's say that the overage is similar to what we see right now reflected in the 2021. What are your options for that money going forward?
So
because we have the same contracts with this relative same amounts for the subsequent year.
Yeah, so we get into the point where we have work being done by the same contractor for the same program, for the same training, and now we're pushing into the next fiscal year, which then causes the vendor to probably not be able to put on all the courses that they want to do for a given fiscal year because they're still trying to catch up with the previous fiscal year. The point of all this is that we will have capacity to have leftover monies for, say, the current fiscal year, and be able to, if we decide that we have training that needs to be extended again, or we have new contracts that for training that we want to create before the end of this current fiscal year, we can do so with the anticipated capacity of our funding.
At what point does that money just, however, revert?
So the reversion of monies, it's usually a 3-year cycle. The money reverts back to essentially the general fund, regardless of where it came from. So it stays encumbered until we disencumber the purchase order tied to each contract. So it cannot be used for anything. In fact, the old money, this 2021 money that we're seeing on the screen here, we can't do anything about it. We can disencumber the purchase order now, which means we can't pay any more bills on it. And then we can't use that money because that's past year money. We can't execute a new contract relative to that. But when you fast forward to the current fiscal year, we can certainly do that. We unencumber purchase orders, and we utilize that money elsewhere as long as we encumber it before the end of the fiscal year.
Not the prior year money.
But not the prior year money. No,
That
that's
money
gonna revert.
essentially has to sit through the encumbrance period and then it will revert.
Correct, yes. And at the end of each fiscal year, or about 2 months out, so by May timeframe, we usually get a list of all our existing purchase orders, regardless whether it's a training contract or other contracts that then we have to disencumber, essentially allowing the money to revert to the state general fund after the next fiscal year. And again, that's whether it's training contracts or other administrative type contracts. And we'll get a list of that. It's a little bit of a process to do, but it's relatively easy. But we do give money back every year for such things.
That kind of bleeds into one of the next item, which is the $55,000 enhancement in the contract. Is that where that money essentially comes from then? Additional money for contract increases is from?
Yeah, so each fiscal year, in the current fiscal year, and relative to this specific request to amend this contract for money, is that we don't fully execute all our contract money each year. In the current fiscal year, we have approximately $4 million that's unencumbered to use for any other purposes for training contracts. And there, to answer your question, yes, this is where this extra funding request is coming from.
Okay, do you want to go to the 21-22 then? I don't think there's much of note on the 21-22 slide.
Correct.
May I add something as well? Again, Scott, I'm sorry.
No.
So you see the extended contracts up there. I think, Scott, you said there's 13 or so. That slide was all during COVID. 2021 was during the heart of COVID, and there was no ICI detective courses being taught because of COVID. So we had a ton of money left over. We didn't know what the budget was going to look like the following year. So even though the money was set to expire at the end of June, we were able to push it all the way through to December, just in case we didn't get a decent budget. So we still have those in place. A lot of them are going to expire at the end of this year. And our goal is not to, as long as we keep having decent budgets, which we hope to do, to stop extending these contracts. So, I mean, we have some of these presenters that are working off 2 fiscal year contracts at the same time. And it's a confusing from an accounting standpoint. And as long as we have decent budgets, there's no necessity to it. But we just didn't know coming out of COVID, what was going to happen.
Scott, before you go into 21-22, one other note that I might add is that from 2021, the quality assessment program, which we've talked about in the last couple of meetings, per the director and executive staff, that's going to be put over till March for continued retooling of the quality assessment program. So that's why you won't see it on the 21-22 chart. So 21-22 brings us to the only item that will require a vote today and later this afternoon, which is a $55,000 increase.
Correct, yes. And this was previously approved by commission at amount of $359,443 back in the February, which is our traditional contract month and soon to be March, as we've added an additional commission meeting each year. And in May of 2021, after this original amount of $359,443 was approved, the program managers held a course curriculum update workshop and identified additional responsibilities for the course coordinator, as well as administrative support for the course coordinator, and determined that those costs would be approximately $55,173. And so the program manager, training program services, has asked for an additional approval for $55,000 because it exceeds our executive director's authority to approve that amount.
So this is the one item that would require a vote. So any questions about this proposed increase of $55,000, which would take it to whatever, $415,000 or something?
14,616 is
There we go.
final.
The executive development. If there's any questions, otherwise we'll need a vote on this and a subsequent vote this afternoon. Any questions or concerns over the proposed increase? Get a motion, I guess.
Move Brazil.
Without objection, we can substitute the previous roll call. Okay.
I have a question if I may, not all related, but it's kind of related. In my memory's kind of going on me. Did we have a conversation in the past when we were actually in meetings, in-person meetings, talking about increasing the executive director's authority, the dollar amount?
That was I recalled the same thing and asked a question earlier this week. I thought we had talked about upping it. It's $25,000, correct? And I thought we too had talked about increasing that, but it didn't.
We did discuss that, and that is definitely on high on our list to do. But I think I don't want to speak for my boss, but I think we got a little sidetracked by SB2 items. But yes, with the dollar figure for approval in-house at $175,000 for contracts and $25,000 for amendments is something that's about, I believe, if my memory serves, it's about 12 years old.
Yeah.
And definitely in need of a review.
At a minimum, we should, it seems to me we should index it for inflation and then probably add a cushion as well, would be my inclination, which is generally what happens in budgeting. So if we want to entertain that, Mr. Executive Director, how would you prefer we go about that?
I actually wrote that down as we were speaking about that it has fallen off of our plate due to this little thing called SB2. However, that's no excuse, and that will be on the agenda for the next round.
Okay.
Maria, do you need any thoughts from us, or you guys want to come back with that later? Or I know it's not an agendized item, but
I would love thoughts from you guys on what you think that his authority should be, or a ballpark figure, or
I'm just going to throw out what I know, what municipal agencies do that have budgets not near as large as this, and there's our responsibility is 100,000 is what you generally see for a department head. I don't know what sheriffs have, because again, they're elected, but you're looking at law enforcement executives, the ability to do that before they have to go to a city council or some kind of governing board or body. That's my experience. I don't know what smaller jurisdictions, but I'm looking at the budget we have, the complexities of it. I think 100,000 is totally reasonable. As long, it could be an information item. Hey, this is what we did,
correct.
But not delaying things because it has to come here for something over $25,000. It's crazy.
Commissioner Brazil, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
And is that 100,000 for amended contract above and beyond what has previously been, or?
That's a really great question.
Okay. Currently, we're at 25,000, so I could see 100,000 being a discussion point.
So we're at amended for 25,000, but contracts are.
Contracts are already at
25,000.
175.
Oh, I'm sorry,
175.
175.
Yeah,
correct.
well, 174,999.
Well.
So is that, so is it for amended or do we?
Yeah, one of the things you might want to consider, Maria, and I'd have to think about it a second, just is I still think you should be able to do amended up to 100,000 and then but per percentage on it. If you're amending a contract that's 50,000, adding 100 onto it, that might be a little bit different than if you have a $3 million contract and we're adding 125. So I would suggest maybe up to 100,000, not to exceed a certain percentage of the original contract, including prior amendments or something like that. It seems reasonable. That way we don't get accused of, let's get a $5,000 contract on board and then add 100,000 to it. Or, of course you've got 175 rates, that wouldn't matter. But just take away any perceptions in that area.
Got it. Sure. And one of the other issues that we've discussed with the contract amounts is moving money around between contracts. That's something that we're also struggling with. So to give an example, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong in my delivery of this, in the spring meeting or in the February, March meeting, we come in and say we need, to execute contracts for EVOC for 3.5 million. And we list all of the different presenters and how much each contract will be. And you all hear the arguments or the delivery, and then you vote. Sometimes we need to move the money around, stay within 3.5 million, but go above on some of them than what's already been on the list, because some presenter might not use their EVOC money and we need to give it to somebody else. We've struggled with that. We think we're okay doing that, but that's something else that I think would be nice to address at the next meeting and kind of codify for us so that we're on firm ground. We're not going above and beyond, but it gives us the ability to move it around within that program a little bit easier.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And in a short end, I would also maybe suggest stopgap to that is that in the motion to adopt that portion of the budget, we just make the motion that 3.5 million, based on that budget, and the executive director has the authority to move around those monies as long as you're within that dollar amount, not to exceed a certain. So to give you that authority right up front in a motion, if we needed to, absent the change in policies that sometimes take a longer time because it's just the way we meet, is the way I'll describe, just trying to get those things done. I think there might be a short stop to help you out with that when we make the budget motions. I don't know if that's okay with you or not, but I'm just thinking that.
I think that's a terrific idea. That really simplifies it for us. It really does, by doing it every on those contracts on a one-time basis every year. Yeah, thank you.
Otherwise, we have to come back now quarterly and ask for, a $25,000 or $50,000 increase, which should be done.
Yeah, and that's just crazy. And also understanding you've got to project what's going to happen 18 months later, in some cases, and it's just super hard to do. And I have the confidence when you're doing that, you're doing it the right way, the right reasons. And again, use information. Hey, we had to move some money around without approval, just information coming back that you made those moves, just so we can kind of keep up with who's got what. So.
Excellent. I think we all agree with that. Commissioner Brazil, thank you very much. Any other questions on the agenda? Any concerns? Otherwise, we have reached the end of our rope today. So as I said before, we'll discuss with the executive director and so forth, and maybe moving this meeting back to, we can also do it. I think it should also be a little bit more flexible. For example, in March, we get the budget and we got the contracts. So we're going to need more time then. So maybe that's not the appropriate month to do it, but sometimes it's very obvious that we can do this in 20, 30 minutes. And I don't know if we need to get everybody together at 9 o'clock for that purpose. We could just do it as adjacent to the regular meeting. So absent any concerns, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.